So at some point between the phone phreaking and the hacking in high school, at some point there, you turned the corner with computers. How did that happen?
What do you mean by turn the corner? You mean
turn the corner? In other words, from phone phreaking and messing around in school, you somehow then graduated to, well, I don't know, bigger and more dangerous things.
Oh yeah, well, I started more hacking into the phone company because at the time I was definitely interested in phone phreaking. Then I took the ability of learning about computer systems to breach Pacific Bell and General Telephone's computer networks and gain control of phone company switches, if you will. So basically had the ability to do anything with anybody's phone service in California at the time, California and Nevada. And that's kind of and we did it not really for any, not any malicious purposes. It was more for pulling pranks, like changing what they call the line class code in a switch on a phone number. What that did is change the type of service. So, we'd go in and change, our friends' home phones to pay phones.
Yes.
So every time they'd make a call, say, please deposit, 25 cents to the point of, changing their service to a prison phone so they could only collect calls.
And I also seem to recall that phone phreaks would get together on dead trunks and they would speak with each other. Now, I only know these things, of course, because I've interviewed so many people like you. And please, folks, don't call yet. They're calling now, and we're not ready for calls. But anyway, so there would be like party line conversations between phone phreaks, all right?
Yeah, I remember those days.
Yes, and I would imagine you were, with some of the information you had, you must have been kind of like a king back then.
Well, I didn't really associate with many people. I had a few, close friends that also were into the same type of hobby, and we just wanted to learn everything there was. So we would talk to others more to, acting like a sponge to get more information.
Yes.
But we weren't really. It wasn't like I'd sit there and hang out on these conference lines just to talk to people. That wasn't really interesting. What I wanted to do was learn the information. How can I get better at gaining more control over telephone company computer systems to pull pranks? That was really the initial goal back in those days.
All right. A couple of myths possibly about you, or not myths. You can clear them up. The whistling you've already covered, but was there something about nuclear weapons? Really?
Oh, well. Oh, yeah. So if you fast forward, back to like 1989, I was arrested by the FBI, and
let's stop here. How did the FBI get on to you?
Well, one of the guys that was kind of hacking with me got upset with me, and he basically called the FBI and told them what I was doing. So it was basicking
you were ratted
out. They didn't know what
out.
I was doing at the time, and so he acted as an informant and basically told him what's going on.
So you were ratted out. Essentially. Yes.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
He did this why? Because you were in a tiff with him over something?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you the story. So we'd constantly be betting against each other, to see, who could do, the better hacking.
Sure.
And the bet was always $150, dinner for two at Spago's. We figured out it's $150.
Right.
And I kept winning. Right. And then he got upset about it and said, well, I'm not going to pay you. And I said, oh yeah, you're not, even though, we have this bet going.
Yeah.
And he goes, no, I'm not paying you. And I said, okay. Then I figured I'd just, kind of play a joke on him. So, and so what I did is on a Friday when he was getting paid, I called up the company and represented us with the Internal Revenue Service, and that we're faxing over our garnishment order. So please don't, please do not give him his check. Right? And the whole idea was just to inconvenience him for the weekend. It was it was like a joke, a practical joke. But he got really, really angry over the whole thing, and then went to his boss. Yeah. And told him all the hacking we were doing, and then they both called the FBI together. So that's basically how I got caught. Was other people knew what I was doing and informed on me.
Ah, that's sad. Well, the FBI apparently did not get you right away, or you were on the lam for a while, or what?
Well, that was later. So I was basically I was okay. So
this was your first
story. So I was arrested.
All right. So this was your first brush with the FBI.
First brush.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
So I ended up in court, in federal court, and I was arrested like on a Friday, and I end up I was in custody at Terminal Island Federal Prison for the weekend, which wasn't fun at all. And I end up in court, and I'm positive I'm going to get bailed out. It just matters how much is the bail going to be. So I end up in federal court, and I walk in, and this attorney walks in that's going to immediately represent me, a federal public defender. He goes, "Have you ever been outside the country?" I go, "No." "Have you ever had a passport?" "No." And we go into court, and the federal prosecutor starts telling this judge, not only do we have to hold Mr. Mitnick without bond because he's such a danger to the community, we have to make sure he can't get access to a telephone. And then he goes on to say, if Mr. Mitnick gets access to a telephone, even a payphone in custody, he could dial up to the modem at NORAD, and he could whistle into the modem and communicate with the modem and instruct it to pass the launch codes to the ICBMs and start a nuclear war.
And you're telling me this judge...
I started laughing.
This judge
heard of something
this
so
judge
ridiculous.
Bought it?
The judge bought it. Or the judge maybe didn't buy it, but just figured...
Didn't matter.
Didn't matter. And so I was held in what they called a hole in the Metropolitan Detention Center in L.A. for almost a year. The only way I got out of the hole...
What? A year?
A year in solitary confinement. The only reason I got out was I agreed to plead guilty. So the prosecutor told my attorney, if Kevin just, does what we want.
Wait a minute. What were the actual charges?
Possession of unauthorized access devices. So I had access codes to be able to dial into MCI, which was a long distance carrier, and then hacking into DEC, Digital Equipment Corporation, and getting access to source code of one of their security tools that acted as an automated hacker because I wanted to learn how the tool worked. So
that's fairly serious, actually.
Anyway, there were serious charges, but so in any event, later on, after about a year, I was able to get out of there because
before we even leave this, what's it like to spend a year in solitary?
It was pretty tough. Can you imagine, like all your listeners going into their bathroom, in their home and shutting the door behind them and not leaving for a year. Now, mind you, they allowed you to shower for, three times a week. They'd let you go into this recreational area that wasn't so much bigger, 1 hour a day.
Only I can imagine that after an extremely spicy dinner. Otherwise,
but I'm telling you, I mean, it was pretty horrific. I wonder how that actually affected me today. But the idea that you're just locked in this, the cell, 23 out of 24 hours a day for a year is like, it was just an incredible amount of like how, I asked myself today, how did I get through such an ordeal? And I just did. You just adapt.
Right. Well, what did you do? I mean, did you sit in your cell and just sort of think? Did you think about computers? Did you think about women? What did you think about?
Thought about escaping. If you
really?
want to know the truth.
Really?
How do I get the hell out of there? Right. So that's kind of like what I thought about. But I had, they allowed me because I wasn't there for being, disciplinary reason. They allowed me to get a Walkman radio, which passed a lot of time and reading books and, sleeping, so a lot of sleeping. But it was a pretty...
Weren't they afraid you'd rearrange the radio and set off a hydrogen bomb?
But, I'll tell you one thing. So imagine I'm in solitary confinement in a federal prison, facing 400 years for hacking into Digital Equipment Corporation. And remember how they said I was so dangerous I couldn't be near a telephone, so the judge... Okay,
now you suddenly got closer to the mic and you sound better. I don't know what you did, but...
I'm holding the mic to my face. I'll start doing that more frequently.
Please.
So anyway, the judge made a special order that I was only allowed to call 5 people at the time, and that was my mother, my grandmother, my attorney, my father. Like I had 5 people on the list that I could call.
Right.
And so... imagine I'm in solitary confinement, and at the time I was married, and I could only call my wife's home number at the time. And she was always at work, and and funny enough, she worked at General Telephone in Thousand Oaks. Yeah, so that was pretty funny. But in any event, so when they would allow me to make a phone call, it was always during the day. So the guard would shackle my hands, shackle my feet, walk me over to this room that had 3 payphones, and the payphones had the handset cords were quite long. And then the guard would take out this logbook. He'd say, "Who do you want to call?" And then tell me what I want to call. He would dial the number with a 0 in front of it because it always had to be collect. And he'd hand me the phone, and he'd sit in the chair watching every move I made.
Just waiting for you to whistle.
No. Well, maybe. But, it got even better than this because I figured I had nothing to lose. What else could they do to me? I'm in solitary confinement in a federal prison. It can't get any worse. So I figured, okay, I'm going to try to beat their system. So what I did is I'd pace back and forth when I was on the phone. I'd be scratching my back. I'd be rubbing my back against the payphone, facing the guard. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to give this a shot. I really wanted to talk to my wife at the time, who was actually at work, and her number wasn't on the list. The work number wasn't on there. So basically, I put my hand behind my back, and I hung up the switch hook. And I knew, then I put my hand in front of me and just acted like I was rubbing my back against the phone again. And I knew I had 18 seconds before it would start going to what they call a reorder, like a fast busy tone, and he would hear it.
Right.
And then I reached back, in back of me and acted like I was scratching my back, and I dialed 0 plus, the work number. And I was pretty good with using a touchtone pad. It wasn't that hard.
Sure.
And as I was walking, I acted like I was in conversation because the operator was going to come on and say, "Who's the collect call from?" So I'd say, "Well, tell Uncle Mitchell that Kevin said hi." And when I said the word Kevin, that's when the operator's asking who the collect call's from. And I was able to do this, right, to call anybody that I wanted for 3 to 4 weeks. And then one morning, about 6 a.m, my cell door opens, and it's the executives of the prison, the associate warden, 2 of them, the captain. I thought that, maybe a family member had died. Something really serious was going on.
Right.
So they brought me into this room, and they sat me down. And then the captain, he's the head of security, goes, "Mitnick, how are you doing it?" And I go, "Excuse me, how am I doing what?" He says, "Well, we're monitoring your phone calls downstairs. We're actually recording all of them. You do have notice about this. And somehow our officer is watching you every second, and you're somehow redialing the phone. How are you doing it?" And then I remarked to him, I said, "I don't know what you're talking about. Do you think, what do you think I am, David Copperfield?"
Right.
Right. And, they didn't like my sense of humor. So they, threw me back in the cell. And then a couple days later, Pacific Bell was out, and they were installing a phone jack in the hallway near where my cell was.
Really?
And I was thinking, are these guys stupid enough to actually, put a phone in my cell that's restricted to calling certain numbers?
Apparently.
That was what going through my head. They couldn't be that stupid. So when it ended up that I actually had to make a call, it was a little bit different. The guard brought a phone. He plugged it into the jack. He dialed the number and then put the handset through the trap door, where they feed you in the cell. So the only thing I could touch was the handset.
Right.
So I kind of felt like Hannibal Lecter in The Silence of the Lambs.
Man, what a story.